Hey, it's the Subterranean Maker here. Last week when we left off with this table, it had no finish applied to it. This middle board moved around and the table wobbled. Now, as you can see, it has a finish. This middle board is nice and strong and the wobble is something of the past. In this video, I'm going to show you how exactly I did all of this. To address the stability issue, I had a suggestion that the legs should be connected. But will that really solve the problem? Let's have a look. This is a representation of our table under normal conditions. Let's look at two cases of what might be causing the instability of the table. Here the table legs are shown bending. It's assumed that the joints are rigid, but that the instability of the table originates from the flexibility of the legs. In this case, connecting them would be beneficial. If the legs are joined as shown, you won't be able to cause instability in the table by bending one leg. Now, both legs and the connecting beam have to bend for this table to become wobbly. In the second case, the joints aren't rigid as we assumed in the previous example. The joints move long before the leg actually bends. I reckon this is the more likely case of what's causing our instability. We're not applying tremendous force to the table, yet it wobbles. I highly doubt that we're bending the legs. The only way to know for sure what causes the instability is to look at the joint to see whether it moves, and look at the leg to see whether it bends while you rock the table from left to right and from front to back. So I'm going to my table now and I'll try to find the source of the instability. This is what I call joint articulation. It just means that the joint can move. If we wiggle this leg, you can clearly see how much movement there is, and this is the cause of our instability. I also noticed that this apron moves when wiggling the joint. This just adds to our instability issue. With the joint identified as the weak spot, we have to figure out a way to reinforce it. This is the plan. We'll use L reinforcements, shown in red, to strengthen the joint. The green shows where it connects to the table. So I'm using scraps of a 2x3 to make the L reinforcements. Here's one reinforcement and there's another. This L piece is the piece we're going to keep. The leg fits in the slot, and then there's two screws, one that comes here and one there, that keeps the L bracket to the tabletop. Then we have a screw that comes through the top and one that comes through the side to attach the leg to the bracket and thus reinforcing it. So here's a cutout L. It's basically 1 inch around the border. This cutout for the leg is 1.5 by 2.5 inches. Now I just have to add the screw holes. The one that's here and here, they're both spaced about 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch from the side. Okay, so after these holes are drilled, we're doing the holes that come through the sides. On the short side, I'm going to make it that the hole is about 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch from the inner side. And on the long side, I'm going to put my hole through the middle. I've already reinforced 2 of the table legs, and in this shot we see the L reinforcement in place. If you remember correctly, we had 2 screws in the inside keeping the table leg to the apron. We had to move those 2 screws to the outside to make this L bracket work. Okay, so to install the bracket, first we're going to remove the legs. While the leg is out, I'm going to take one of these screws and drive it all the way through the apron until it just protrudes. This way we don't have to remeasure, mark and drill the positions of the screws. It's just more accurate this way. Driving the screw through the apron effectively marked where they should go from the outside when reinstalling the leg. So we position our L bracket and squeeze it into the position that we want it to sit. Then we can screw it to the tabletop. With all the screws roughly in place, we can gradually and evenly start to tighten them down. Let's see what difference that makes. So I'm going to wiggle both joints, the braced and the unbraced joint, to see how much they move. The braced joint is much stronger. Okay, so let's see where we're at after we've installed our L reinforcements. In this direction, the table is pretty sturdy, but from side to side, it's very wobbly. So I think it has to do with the long aprons that are able to move, and we're going to fix it by gluing them up. While we're busy doing the long aprons, we're going to glue the short ones as well. I'm going to remake this apron so that there's no gap. In that way, the short apron and the long apron will bond together much better. I've removed the leg and unscrewed the long apron. Now I can just remove the apron, clean up and glue it in place. I'm keeping the L bracket in place so that it's easier to replace this long apron. The screws clamp down the long apron to the tabletop, so if the glue squeezes out, that's a good sign and it's easy to clean up. Before you start applying glue, make sure the area is clean. You can even wipe it down with an alcohol cleaner. Apply your glue and don't be shy now, it's easy to clean up. Apply it both to the workpiece and the other piece that you're joining it to. The end grain is usually porous, so when you put your glue on here, make sure to force it into the pores so that it evens out the surface. With all the surfaces glued up, you can mate them together and clamp them down. Like I said in the previous video, I don't have clamps, so the screws are going to clamp this into position. While we're busy here, we'll apply glue to the L reinforcement and put it in position as well. The glue squeezes out from the edges, that's a good sign, and it's easy to just clean up with a damp cloth. With everything glued up, we have to leave the table for about 24 hours so that the glue can fully cure. The other thing that remains is to support this board, this middle board. We'll probably do this by adding braces that go from one side to the other. After the glue has cured, the table is much more sturdy. I've definitely underestimated the power of wood glue. I'm now going to add the tabletop supports. I'm going to add two. One 2 feet from this side and one 2 feet from that side. To get the length of the reinforcements, I'm going to measure the distance between the two aprons instead of calculating the distance, because I haven't really been working very accurately and the table isn't square. With the reinforcements marked, I'm going to make the cuts now. With the reinforcements loosely in place, we can mark our screw holes. I'm going to use 2 screws per board per reinforcement. Okay, we'll now glue them up and put them in place. And now the other side. The middle board is cupped, so I'm going to flip the table around and apply pressure from the outside to try and get this board to mate with a reinforcement. There doesn't seem to be much I could do about the cupping. If it's cupped, it's cupped. I added another screw in the middle of the reinforcement to draw the cut board flat. That didn't work, so we still have the gap. The gap is a problem because this means that the glue wouldn't properly adhere the reinforcement to the tabletop on this middle board. Maybe at the sides, but definitely not at the middle. Now that the table is structurally done, we can apply our finish. First, I'm going to sand down the table using this random orbit sander. I'm going to start with a 120 grit disc and then move to 220. After that, we can apply our finish. I've decided to use a wipe-on polyurethane as the finish. The reason I chose this is because I want a durable finish that's easy to apply. I didn't want to use the water-based polyurethane because it gives a colder look than the oil-based polyurethanes. Okay, we're moving to the finer sandpaper now. These ridges here were kind of a problem, but I'm not going to work them away because it's just going to be a mess. It was a bit of an issue getting into the corners to sand there, but I managed, although the disc suffered a bit. After sanding, be sure to clean the surface well. You don't want any dust trapped within the finish. After brushing it, you can use something like paint thinner, mineral spirits or denatured alcohol to wipe it down. For the application of the polyurethane, I'm going to use some rags, paint thinner as a cleanup, and then obviously the polyurethane itself. As per the instructions, I'm going to apply 3 coats, waiting 4 hours in between, and sanding with 220 grit paper between the second to last and the last coat. When working with these products, be sure to use some rubber gloves and an organic vapor respirator just to keep you safe. Also ensure that the area is well ventilated, especially if you don't have a respirator. So right off the bat when I got this, the cap was stuck on, and I'm assuming some of the product leaked out during transportation and storage. So the first thing you want to do is remove the plastic childproof cap. Take 2 screwdrivers or spoons and pry off the cap. So if you have locking pliers or any other plier that can grip the cap, you can simply just twist it off. I didn't have any pliers, so what I did is I took a screwdriver and put it on the edges where the plastic cap would normally engage this metal cap. And then I hit it with the back of my hand until it broke free, and then I could just twist it off. In this shot I just wanted to show what the wood looks like before and after. It's quite hard to see the difference with a naked eye, which makes it hard to apply. It's hard to see where the finish has been applied, so I'm using a light to highlight where I'm at. Okay, it's time for the second coat. I can already feel the finish, it's nice and smooth. It's time for the third coat of polyurethane, but before that I'm going to sand down the table with a 220 grit disc on the Orbit sander. It's interesting to see what the finish is like. This is a rag similar to the one I used to apply the finish, and this is the rag I used, and it's kind of hard and plasticky after it's stood overnight. With the tabletop done, we can proceed to do the legs and the underside. It's the same procedure as the top, so I'm not going to show it in the video, but it's necessary. So that concludes this week's video. We reinforced the table legs and the middle board of the tabletop, and we also applied our finish. Next week I'll talk about what I would do differently if I had a do-over, and we'll review the design. So if you like this video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment.